Hello and welcome to OctopusDo. I'm Kristen Ross. Today I'm going to talk about a seed bead weaving technique. It's an off the loom technique called Peyote Stitch. Now we'll start with an even count Peyote Stitch because that's a little bit more simple. There's a little bit of backtracking when you get into odd count Peyote Stitch, but don't worry, I'm going to show you how to do that a little later on in another video. But today we'll start with even count Peyote Stitch. I am using these large hole beads that have the alphabet on it, so you'll be able to keep up with the first bead, the second bead, the third bead, because we're going to go in alphabetical order. I'm using some S-Lon thread just for demo purposes, and because we need a needle to get through these beads, I'm using this Beadsmith Big Eye needle. The entire needle basically is the whole part. Now to get started, I'm just going to pull off length of thread. I'm going to use maybe 2 yards. I don't think I'm going to need that much, but that's going to give me plenty to play with. So I have my thread, and the next thing that you need to do is use a stop bead. A stop bead is a bead that's going to be really easy to remove when you're done with your piece, but it's going to keep all of the beads that you string onto your thread and not fall off the end without having to put a knot at the end that you would have to cut off or do something like that. So I'm going to take the end of my cord, and since we're talking about using the end, I'll use my Z bead here, and I put just the end through once, just like that. See, there's the end of my thread. I want to give myself a little bit of thread to hold on to, so I'm pulling this through, and then I go back in a circle. So I'm taking the end and going back through the same hole that I went through, same side I went through once. So what that does is it wraps around, the thread wraps around that bead, but it's not tied in a knot. So when you're doing this with your fire line, then it's really going to be snug on those little bitty seed beads. But for right now, this is going to be great just to show you how this works. So that is your stop bead. Next, I'm going to thread the top of my string here through my needle. Pick that up, put my string through. There we go. So here is one end, and with the needle, here's the other. Now don't do anything like tie this onto the needle. You just want your string going through your needle and being loose, because you're going to pull this through your bead and it will look like that as it goes through. So we're talking about doing even count Peyote Stitch right now. So that means I need to pick up an even number of beads. The number of beads that you pick up is going to be how wide your piece is. So something that is 6 beads wide will, with seed beads, be about that big and make a nice bracelet, ring, pair of earrings, anything like that. So we're going to pick up 6 beads. So A, B, C, I have 6 beads on here, and yes, they're going backwards, but if I string this down this direction, pull my string through, and I'm going to leave some space here for my stop bead. There we go. So even though you have only 6 beads in a straight line right now, this is actually going to be your first 2 rows or row and a half, depends on how you look at it. But basically, it's in Peyote Stitch, the beads are offset on the second row. So we're going to turn around, go back the other way, and I'll show you how that offset works. All right, so the next letter after F is G, but G is going to be in the next row. So I'm going to pick up my letter G and pull that string through. Now, you could have G going in that straight line, but we're starting the new row, so G comes out here and makes the next row, like that. All right, so now G is the first bead in the next row. We're not going to H yet. G swings around and then goes through E. Make sure things don't get tangled up. All right. So when you pull that snug, the 2 on the end here stack up. There you go. So this is your first row, going to G to F. You can see they flipped around. So going first row goes through F. G is the next one. It swings around, goes through E. All right. So I have a thread going into E, around these 2, and then back through E. The next thing I do is I pick up my next letter, which is the H. So I'm going to go through the H to pick it up. So I pick up the H and I pull my thread through so you can see how this is going. All right. So F and G, E. H is going to sit right on top of the D. So you have 2 beads stacked here, going through E, 2 beads stacked here. So the D and the H are on top of each other. Hope this is making sense so far. String is coming out of the H, and I go back through the C and pull everything tight. So putting my hands here to hold everything down while the string goes through. All right, kind of looks like a mess, but here's the beauty of it. If you pull these tight, pull both strings tight, everything starts to line up. There you go. So F and G are double, then the E, the D and H double, and they're both going through the C. So that leaves the B and the A. What are we going to do with those? Follow the pattern, keep going, and you're going to slide the B down, and you're going to pick up your next letter, which is I. And the I is going to sit right on top of the B, like so. It's like hopscotch. 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now you have to go through the A, and that is the last bead on your row because the Z is your stop bead. So I'm going through the A and pull that tight. There you go. And then everything looks a little wonky until you start pulling everything tight. There you go. The key to a good peyote stitch, a pretty peyote stitch, is making sure everything is lined up. There you go. When I say even count, that means that the number of side-to-side rows, or the width of your piece, is an even number of beads. We're using 6 for this one. So row 1, Row 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Remember how when we got to the end here with the F, we added the G and flipped it over? We're going to do the same thing here. So we left off with the I, the J is the next letter, so I need to pick up the J. Like so. Now, that is going to nestle in right on top of the A, and that's your third row. That's starting your third row. So I've got the J, it is flipped over, and I run my needle through the I. So basically the J is going to sit on top of the A, so I need to skip that A and run through the letter I. And pull that. So there we go. Make sure everything's tight. Okay, and you see the space on top of the C. So we're going to put the next letter, which is K. And go through the H. Just the H. So basically with this, every time you're adding a bead, you're picking up one bead at a time and sewing through one bead at a time. There you go. Now, on top of the E is going to be the next letter, which is L. So string the L. So I add that bead, and it's going to go through the G, the string, all right, so we have 3 rows so far. So can you guess how the next row is going to start? We've reached the end. The thread is coming out of the G. So you're going to add the next bead. It flips over and sits on top of the G and goes back through that L that you just added. So basically it sits on top and goes through. And we continue our hopscotch game. M is the next one, so that's going to slide down. And you see if I just added it to the end here, then it would start to make this longer and it would stair step down. That's not what I want. I want to continue out this way so that flips around. And to stay, it goes, the string goes through the L. And there you go. So you have 3 beads stacked here, and then 2, so 3 beads will be stacked here. I'm going to continue this pattern and I'll let you watch until we get all the way to the end of the alphabet, and we'll see what we get. Okay, so this is my X. Apparently, the bag of beads that I purchased didn't have an X on it, so I just sanded off the top of this and drew an X. So that's why that one looks a little bit different. I'm going to stop with the X because, well, I used the Z already as my stop bead, and the X puts me at the end of the row. So I'll go ahead and string that one on and show you how to finish this off. The first thing that I notice when I look at this is that it's a little bit crooked. It's a little bit diagonal. The reason that is because when I got to the end of each row, I didn't pull my string tight. Don't worry, if you've done that, try to catch it as soon as you can, which I haven't gone very far through this, so I can go back and straighten it up. But if you've made a bracelet and it's a little wonky, it's because when you get to the end, you haven't really pulled it tight. When I get to showing you this with some seed beads, I'll show you how to hold everything that will let you pull everything tight and keep everything nice and organized. But I can go back here because these beads have such a large hole and tighten everything up, make it look a little bit better. So that's what I'm going to do. I start down here with the Z, which is my stop bead because that's my first row, and I can pull that tight, and you see how everything's cinched up a little bit better. Then I can go in here and go to the next row, and I hold this down with my finger, and I'm pulling on the bottom part, so that cinches that up. Then I come to the next, pull that a little bit tighter, and I'm going to come in with my pliers because that's going to give me an even better grip. Now I know we're working with thread, so you don't have to have pliers. I'm just using these to pull everything, and you see how that works really well? If your fingers are ever too big to get into the places that they need to get to, you can always use pliers instead. That's really one thing that I like about PeyoteStitch so much, is when you're using cylinder beads, especially like your Tohos, everything just snaps into place and it makes this almost fabric material. It's really quite lovely. So there we go. We have everything lined up perfectly. Now I've got all of this thread hanging out. We're going to pretend that this is bracelet length. So pretend that this is from here down one end, and from here up, way up there, and it's a bracelet. It's that long. To end this off, there's several different ways, but if you want to not have a knot at the end, what you can do is you can weave your thread back through your piece, and that will bury the thread and keep it from pulling out, and then you can use a finding that you like, however you like, to finish everything off. So basically my thread is coming out here. I still have my needle, and you don't have to weave zigzag through. If you go in a straight line, it's kind of like those not word cross puzzles, but one of those find a word puzzles where you can go diagonally. Is you can put your needle through there and just follow the thread, and sometimes it helps to pick it up, and go diagonally through, and that will help bury your thread. And you can bend your piece like that so that the needle has a way to come through. without getting stuck. And it will be extra secure if you change direction. So I have this coming out here. I can change direction and go back this way. And that change in direction just gives me a little more friction, basically. It buries the thread so that it buries the thread in a part of your piece that doesn't get a lot of wear and tear, doesn't get a lot of movement, and therefore it shouldn't come out. All right, and then I go back through the S. There we go. So by weaving it back through, changing direction, and going back out, I buried this thread in the piece where I'm confident that it's not going to come back out. So I can cut this thread off at this point. Just a quick little snip. And if you have a little bit of the thread showing there, you can try to cut it closer, or you can use a thread zap or a lighter to very carefully run the flame over, and it will cause that to curl up and go back into the bead. And that makes a nice clean finish on this end. Now, what about this end we started? Well, what you can do with that is take your needle, unthread that stop bead. Then you thread this end that you used as a handle back through your needle, like so, and then you're going to go back through and you'll bury this end. So remember, it's coming out of the A, so I don't want to go back through the A because that would just unthread it. Don't want to do that. So I'm going to go the next bead down, which is that J, and come through. There we go. And remember, you can bend up your piece so that your needle isn't running into the next bead. And I came unthreaded here. When you're using the smaller seed beads and the smaller needles, it's going to be a lot easier to keep your thread in your needle. Promise you. There we go. Run that through, and then keep going and bury that thread through. Since I'm working with such a small piece, I'm just going to start the needle through the eye there and grab it, and then just be sneaky and thread there so it pulls through. Nice. So there you go. You keep doing that. Go through a couple of rows, maybe turn around halfway through, and you'll have that end buried as well, and you can trim it, and you end up with a nice solid piece of peyote. If that makes sense, the next step is to do this with real seed beads instead of the ones labeled. Until I see you next time, now you know, go make something.